Hi, this is Dr. Jenny Sue Flanagan. Thanks for joining me as we look at how to plan successful Madeline Hunter lessons. In this video, you're going to see how I planned a lesson around static electricity. For our time together, we're going to look at how you embed instructional strategies and cooperative learning structures within your lesson plan. We'll also look at the elements of Madeline Hunter. For this video, we're going to use two tools, Jamboard and also Google Forms. You can find links to these in the description area of the video. Our roles together, when you see the teacher hat, this is where you will be looking at through the lens of as a teacher. And if you see the student hat, you're going to do what a student would do. All right, let's get started with our first activity. This is our anticipatory set for our lesson on static electricity. What do you see, think, and wonder as you're watching this video? All right, time to fill out your see, think, wonder. Again, the link to go to the Jamboard is in the description area. Share out what you saw, what you thought about, and what you wondered as you watched the video. The anticipatory set in Madeline Hunter is the beginning of the lesson plan. When you're designing your anticipatory set, you want something that's going to hook your students in. You want something that's going to pique their curiosity. You also want to tie to the previous day's lesson if you've already begun a unit of instruction. I chose to use the balloon attracting an aluminum can because I wanted to give my students something that would allow them to show me what they already knew about static electricity, but also I wanted something that would amaze them. The next part of the lesson plan is where you identify what you want your students to be able to do at the end of the lesson. So here you can see I really wanted students to provide examples of static electricity, and I want to identify ways to generate static electricity. So all of my activities are going to point back to these objectives. Your objectives and purpose is just second part of the Madeline Hunter format. Again, this is simply where you identify for students what the purpose of the lesson is. What are you hoping for them to know and be able to do at the end of the lesson? In elementary, you can have the students repeat these I can statements. Middle and high school, you might simply want to post them and constantly come back and reference them. All right, so we're going to continue learning about static electricity. To do this, we're going to actually go through 4 stations. Now, in the description for this video, there's a link to a Google document that has an observation form. You're going to need to make sure you get a copy of it because as you go through the videos, I want you to write down your observations of what you observe happening. Here is station 1. What you're going to observe in this video is I've already rubbed the piece of wool across the comb, and you're going to see me placing the comb near the pieces of paper. Again, as you watch the video, write down what you observe as you are watching. All right, in station 2, we've taken a cotton towel and we rubbed it over the surface of a balloon. And there's a piece of plastic that we've actually cut and made a little band, and we've rubbed that with the towel as well. Make your observations in your notebook. For station 3, I took the balloon, I rubbed it on my head, and you're going to see me take the balloon next to the salt. Again, write down what you observe. Station 4, we've again taken a plastic ruler and we've rubbed it with a piece of wool, and you're going to see a tiny paper snake. Watch and record your observations of what you observe. Now let's go to Jamboard, and I want you to share out your observations for the 4 stations. Again, you can find that link in the description of this video. Now, if we were in the classroom during this part of the lesson, I would actually have students sharing out what they observed and what they think is going on. I like to use these science talk stems for lower elementary to help them be able to have conversations and give them the words to speak. Now that we've done some activities focused on observing static electricity in action, now what I want to do is I want us to read about static electricity and see what scientists actually say about static electricity. To do this, we're going to use a pre-reading strategy called THIEVES. We're going to try and steal some information before we read to make sense of it. THIEVES is an acronym that stands for title, headings, introduction, every first sentence, visual vocabulary, end of chapter questions, and summary. As students are previewing the text, they would go through and they would fill out this THIEVES strategy sheet where they identify what is the title of the piece, what are the headings, what's the introduction. Let's look at this quick reading here. Let's start with the first piece of the acronym, the title. What is the title? Static electricity and lightning. So I would actually fill that out in my title area. I would then look at what are the headings. Well, I can see one heading is static electricity. I can see another one is lightning. Again, I'm going to work with my students as a whole class to go through and fill out this pre-reading strategy. Let's move to fill out our pre-reading strategy now. Again, you can find the Google form for this THIEVES strategy in the description of this video. Now that we've done our pre-reading work, let's go through and actually read this quick article. Stop the video, pull up the article and read it, and get ready to do your summary. As we move on to the next part of the lesson, this is where I want to go over the reading with the students. So I want to actually talk about that static electricity is an electrical charge that's created by friction. Static electricity can also cause sparks or crackling or the attraction of dust or hair. So if we go back to the activities that you observed, in each of those you saw where the pieces of paper were attracted to the comb, the salt was attracted to the balloon, and you saw where the balloon actually repelled the piece of plastic. And you saw at the very beginning where the can was attracted to the balloon. Now that we've done some activities, we've read about static electricity, we've talked about it, what I want to do is take all of that and I want students to write a summary to kind of put it all together in their head. So this is a strategy that I created called TAME Your Summary. Again, it's an acronym. T stands for title of the reading, A is the author, M is the main idea, and E is explaining the key details that support the main idea. So let's take some time and go through and let's see if we can come up with taming our summary. What I'd like you to do is pull up the Tame Your Summary worksheet, again in the description area, and start to fill it out. All right, how'd you do? So if you tamed your summary, you should have something like this. Title of the reading, Static Electricity and Lightning. The author was Dr. Jenny Sue Flanagan. Main idea of the reading. Static electricity is a natural occurring electric charge or shock. Key details. Static electricity is an electrical charge created by friction. Static electricity is the cause of sparks, crackling, or the attraction of dust or hair. Static electricity is the cause of lightning. Again, the purpose of this strategy is to get kids to summarize what they've learned. If I was actually doing this in the classroom with a group of students, I might use my language arts time the next morning to actually have my students take what they put in their TAME summary and put it in a paragraph and wordsmith it. You can see here that I've reworded the elements found on my TAME summary so that you're not hearing so much static electricity is this, static electricity is that. Again, this is something that can be done during language arts time. Thus, I save time in my science time to do more hands-on. We have done a lot so far. We have seen the anticipatory set, and we've also gone through our objectives and our purpose, and we just completed the input phase of Madeline Hunter. It's the third part of the lesson cycle that you design. In the input, you are introducing the content. We have to think about how we introduce it to students to make it effective. When I'm designing my lesson plans, I try to think about what are activities, what are things that I can do that make it concrete for students. And it's not so much me asking questions like, what is static electricity? What do you already know? Instead, I'm giving students, like you saw, an activity where they're actually able to see it in action, and I can pull out some of their thoughts and pre-assess what they already know. I also am going to use those learning experiences to tag vocabulary so that it becomes really concrete. This input series of the Madeline Hunter lesson plan format is really important. I went through and intentionally picked certain strategies and things that I wanted my students to do for a very specific reason. For instance, the stations. I wanted my students, as I said before, to experience static electricity in a concrete way. I wanted them to do it. I didn't want them to sit and just watch me do it. I wanted them to do it. I also then had to think about, how do I have them take notes, write down their observations? It's important that students are writing down things so that they have something to go back to when they are processing new learning. I also had to think about, how do I get my students to talk to each other, not just to me? So I wanted to add in those sentence starter frames so that we could build a conversation off of each other. I added in the THIEVES pre-reading strategy because I knew I wanted my students to read a piece of reading that would give them what scientists say static electricity really is. So it's not just me as the teacher giving them the information. That THIEVES strategy was a great way to help students pre-read and to get them excited about the reading. I intentionally created the summary strategy, the TAME your summary, because I wanted the students to work on summarizing what they had just read. Again, they've seen it with the hands-on station experiences. We've talked about it. They've read about it. Now I want them to put it all together, and I want them to actually summarize it so they have a concrete picture in their mind through words. What is static electricity and where do we see it in the real world? Again, all of these elements were specifically chosen for a purpose for this lesson. The fourth part of your lesson plan format in Madeline Hunter is called the modeling phase. This is where you are giving kids, again, the opportunity to see their learning. Maybe in math class, you are actually working problems on the board. Maybe you're actually having students tell you, okay, if this is the first step, what would be the next step? So again, I'm going over things for my students to see that learning in action, and we're doing it together. In this lesson, the static electricity lesson plan, the stations, the reading, the TAME your summary, these were all of my parts of modeling. And I, again, was very intentional in selecting these items for the lesson plan. In this next portion of the lesson plan, I'm going to give students 2 balloons. One's going to be tied from the ceiling or from their desk, and they're going to have a loose balloon. And I'm simply going to say to the groups of students, how could you use what you know about static electricity to move the other balloon? And this is where each group would actually work on trying to use the free balloon to move the one that is tied on the desk. The next step in the Madeline Hunter format is guided practice. This is where students are practicing their new learning under your supervision as the teacher. Again, in the previous activity, students were given 2 balloons and they were given a challenge. How could you use static electricity and the free balloon to move the other one? So again, students are having to take what they know and they're having to try and use it. This is where we are, as teachers, we are supervising the students and we're helping them during this guided practice. All right, the next part of the Madeline Hunter format is independent practice. Just exactly what it says. This is where students are working on their own. They're actually having to try and solve something or solve a problem. In the static electricity lesson plan, this is where students would actually be doing a short performance task, and they would have to solve this problem of writing a blog post. Again, in this independent practice, I may have all the students doing this independently. I'm giving them the hands-on materials and I'm letting them go and actually attempt this on their own. Independent practice is exactly what it means. The teacher is releasing students to actually go and practice whatever content, concept, skill on their own. Teacher is going around and helping the students. Again, this is where you might differentiate your types of activities for students based off what they know and what they need practice with. All right, the last part of Madeline Hunter is our closure. This is where you should wrap your lesson up. I like to put in some sort of quick assessment piece, usually non-graded, where I could find out what the students thought about the lesson, what they learned. In this static electricity lesson, I used a strategy called 3-2-1 exit ticket. You can see it on the screen. Again, it's quick and easy to collect. It's not going to be graded, but it's going to give me information on what the students have learned. Every lesson needs a clear closure. This is maybe not necessarily the end point of the lesson, but more of a final check for understanding used at the end of that class period. So again, you really want to think about how can I find out what my students learned in this lesson. Okay, so there you have it. Madeline Hunter, static electricity lesson. You saw the anticipatory set, objectives and purpose, input, modeling, check for understanding, guided practice, independent practice, and closure. Now in just a moment, we're going to talk about pacing, but I want to talk about a section of the lesson plan format that you might not have seen yet, but you're asking, where did it go? And that is the check for understanding piece. Check for understanding is not necessarily a section of the lesson plan, but rather a place where you write down how are you going to check for understanding? How are you going to check to make sure that your students are getting it? And where throughout your lesson are you going to have those points where you're going to stop and you're going to check for understanding? Again, the purpose of check for understanding is to see, have my students got it? Should I move forward? Do I go backwards? These are critical points in your lesson plan where you want to strategically place those questions to see if your students are getting it. So in this lesson sequence, the check for understanding points occurred in several different places. For instance, the very beginning, when I did the can and the balloon, the anticipatory set, this is where I was trying to see what do students already know. If I heard students saying static electricity caused it, then I would know they've seen some things or they've read some things about static electricity. When we did the science talk, again, that's an opportunity for me to listen to students' words, listen to what they're thinking. The TAME, the strategy, again, that summary strategy, great place to check to see if they've got it. Questions when I ask students like, what did you observe? What did you think of this? And again, that exit ticket at the end are all points in my lesson sequence where I was checking to see if students were getting it or if they were confused. Okay, as we finish up our time together, let's just talk for a moment about pacing. Pacing is one of the hardest things as a new teacher that you're going to have to just simply get used to. It comes with being in the classroom, and it comes with the more you plan and the more you're actually teaching. Okay, so for this lesson plan that I developed in this video, I knew that I had in 5th grade, typically teachers have about 35 minutes per day for science. And I know that the school division that I used to work in said, okay, for this unit on electricity, you had 4 weeks to teach all of the stuff that's in this unit. Again, this unit of instruction was written around SOL 5.4, talking about investigating and understanding that electricity is transmitted and used in daily life. Let's take a moment and look for a second at the curriculum framework, not just looking at the standard that you see here on the screen, because the standard just gives me the topics that students need to learn, but I want to know, what do they need to know and do? If you teach in Virginia, you know that the Department of Education in Virginia has a great document called the Curriculum Framework. It's for every subject K through 12, and it outlines what students need to know and be able to do at the end of the unit of instruction. Now, typically, I build a unit of instruction around 1 or 2 SOLs. As you can see here on the screen, this is everything that students need to know and be able to do at the end of this unit on electricity. It's quite a lot when you look at it, and as you're looking at this, you can see that what's on the left-hand side is not necessarily aligned to what's on the right-hand side. So as a teacher, I've got to actually unpack this, and I've got to put the pieces together that would naturally form a lesson. Let me show you what I mean. Here's the same curriculum framework, just reorganized. I went through and I took all of the no's that went with the topic of static electricity, all of the no's that went with what is electricity, how is electricity transformed, and what does an electromagnet, how does it help us to understand electricity, and I lump those pieces together. You can see the next lesson is all about what is a circuit. So students are exploring series, parallel, and they look at what things insulate and conduct, what things do or do not allow electricity to flow. So I've reorganized that curriculum framework. I've unpacked it so that it makes sense for me, and I have a clear outline now of how my unit flows with regard to what things go together. And so when you unpack those curriculum frameworks and you reorganize them, you actually get an idea of how lessons seem to naturally flow out of that document. This is a step that takes a little bit of time, but it's worth it if you are building a unit of instruction to kind of outline how many lessons around each topic are you going to have. Notice you can also see that I've worked out how many days. I know how many days in 4 weeks I have. And I know that roughly, I think static electricity is going to take me 2 days. Electricity is going to take me maybe about 5 or 6 days. And then circuits are probably going to take me another 3 to 4 days. Again, the first time teaching this, it's going to take you a little bit to get used to it. But again, I kind of like to build in some time at the end so that I have days that I can kind of catch up. And as you see here, I have a performance task at the end that I want students to complete. I'm also going to show you an extra step that a lot of school divisions don't necessarily give you, and that's creating a pacing calendar with my unit topics laid out. This is just what I do to kind of get a feel for, okay, if I start on this day, here's how it's going to flow for the next 4 weeks. Again, it may not be as pretty as starting on a Monday. In this graphic, you can see that I start on a Monday, but maybe my previous unit ends on a Wednesday and I would start on a Thursday. So again, I would just start on that Thursday with my lesson 1, and I would again lay it out and show where are my assessment days, how do my lessons flow, what does it look like in terms of my performance task at the end. And you can see here I've built in actually 2 days that I have catch-up days. Again, this Pacing I may need to take those days to slow down and give my students a chance to really dig deep into the content. Again, as you teach year after year, and if you're lucky enough to teach the same grade level, you'll know that students need more time with circuits because that's a hard piece for students to wrap their minds around. You'll know that static electricity you can move through quicker. You'll just start to learn what students will be able to do after you've taught it. So again, here's what my pacing for each day might look like. I said I was going to give myself 2 days to kind of cover static electricity. So that anticipatory set, I'm going to imagine is going to take me about 5 minutes. Now, I might come dressed up as a magician, and I might try to make a big production about this rolling can being attracted to the balloon. But again, I'm going to spend about 5 to 6 minutes. It's only going to take me about a minute to have my students go over those objectives and purpose. And then that input and modeling where I'm doing those stations, this is where I'm going to have my students spend about 5 minutes at each station. We're going to go around from station to station. I'm going to try and get at least 2 stations done, maybe 3 in one class period. Maybe I might get lucky and be able to do all of them in one class period. Again, depending on my time, I'm going to make sure I leave time to do that exit ticket, that 3, 2, 1. We're going to clean up and we're going to do that exit ticket. Then I'm going to come back on day 2. I'm going to have another anticipatory set. And this is where I'm going to have my students take balloons and rub them on their head, and they're going to stick them to the wall and use what they learned the previous day to try and tell me what and why it's happening. Again, I'm going to go into guided practice where students are going to come up with a solution for the task with the 2 balloons. We're going to try it out. And then I'm going to give 15 minutes for that independent practice. Notice that on day 1, that reading is going to take part in language arts time. This is how I'm going to buy myself time to do more of the hands-on activities. And that's something very unique to elementary, especially if you are a self-contained teacher. If you are team teaching, this is where you're going to want to work with your team teacher to see if they could use that reading during whole group reading time. By integrating my reading into language arts, like I said, I free up time for me to do those valuable hands-on experiences for students to actually see static electricity in action. So again, with your pacing through the day, it's just trial and error. Always over-plan as opposed to under-planning. It's better to have too much and not get through it and adjust for the next day than to not have enough during that day. I hope this video has been helpful for you in thinking about the pieces of Madeline Hunter and what does a lesson plan look like when we have those strategies embedded.